The battlefield was nothing but fire and ash. Smoke curled into the dark sky, and the scent of burning metal filled the air. Commander Ethan Voss moved carefully through the wreckage, his rifle raised. The war between humanity and the Zephyr Dominion had lasted for years, and today's battle had been brutal. The enemy's warship had fallen from the sky like a dying beast, crashing into the ruined city below. Now, Ethan and his squad had one job: search for survivors. His comm device crackled to life. "Commander, most of the area is clear. No human survivors," a soldier reported. Ethan frowned. No survivors. That was unlikely. The Zephyr were tough, but surely some had lived through the crash. And if they had, his orders were clear: eliminate them. But Ethan wasn't the kind of man to follow orders blindly. As he stepped over a broken wall, he saw something that made him stop. A small movement beneath the debris. A piece of shattered armor caught the light. Someone was alive under there. Cautiously, he approached. He grabbed a metal beam and shoved it aside. The moment he did, he saw her. A Zephyr woman lay trapped beneath the wreckage. Her armor was cracked, her pale silver skin streaked with blood. Her breathing was weak, but her eyes flickered open, revealing iridescent violet irises that shimmered in the dim light. Ethan tensed. Zephyr warriors were deadly, even when wounded, but something about her expression made him hesitate. She wasn't reaching for a weapon. She wasn't trying to fight. She just stared at him. He lowered his rifle slightly. "Can you move?" he asked. The woman's lips parted, but no words came out. She was too weak. A deep gash ran down her side, and the fires around them were growing hotter. If he left her here, she wouldn't survive. Ethan knew what his orders were: no mercy for the enemy. But as he looked at her, something inside him refused to obey. She was just like him, a soldier caught in a war she never asked for. Gritting his teeth, he moved forward. He tossed his rifle over his shoulder and crouched beside her. She flinched slightly but didn't resist as he carefully lifted the debris off her. "This is a bad idea," he muttered to himself, but he didn't stop. The Zephyr woman let out a pained gasp as he pulled her free. She was lighter than he expected, her armor surprisingly delicate compared to the bulky human exosuits. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out, and she collapsed against him. "Whoa, easy there," Ethan said, steadying her. Her eyes met his again. This time, there was something else in them: confusion, disbelief, maybe even gratitude. Before he could say another word, his comm device buzzed again. "Commander Voss, report. Have you located any Zephyr survivors?" Ethan exhaled sharply. If he reported the truth, he'd be ordered to execute her on the spot. If he lied... He glanced at the Zephyr woman. She was barely holding on to consciousness. "Negative," he said into the comm. "No survivors here." There was a pause. Then, "Understood. Return to base when you're done sweeping the area." Ethan sighed. He had just committed treason. What the hell am I doing? He didn't know. But one thing was certain: he couldn't leave her here. And now, the real trouble was about to begin. Ethan carried the wounded Zephyr woman through the burning ruins, his arms tightening around her as she let out a weak breath. Her body was cold, and he could feel the faint tremors of pain running through her. The glow of the fires reflected off her cracked armor, making her look even more fragile. He had no idea why he was doing this. He had fought against the Zephyr for years. He had seen their ships destroy human colonies, their soldiers cut down his own people. And yet here he was, saving one of them. This is a mistake. But he didn't stop. The sounds of distant gunfire echoed through the ruined city. His squad was still sweeping the area, searching for any remaining enemies. If they found him like this, carrying an injured Zephyr, they would call him a traitor. "Hang on," he muttered, adjusting his grip on her. "Just stay awake." The woman stirred slightly in his arms, her eyes fluttered open, those strange violet irises meeting his. There was confusion in them, maybe even a little fear. "Why?" she whispered, her voice weak. Ethan frowned. Why what? She swallowed painfully before speaking again. Why? Save me. Ethan didn't answer right away. He wasn't even sure himself. Maybe it was because she looked different from the other Sci-Fi. Less like a cold, ruthless warrior, and more like a person. Maybe it was because she hadn't tried to kill him the moment she saw him. Or maybe, deep down, he was just tired of the war. I don't know, he admitted. Her eyes searched his face as if trying to understand him. You should have left me. Ethan sighed. Maybe. But I didn't. She blinked slowly, her strength fading again. Ethan knew he couldn't stay out in the open. He had to find shelter before the rest of the squad circled back. He spotted an abandoned building, its walls cracked but still standing. It would have to do. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, placing her gently against the wall. The room was dark, covered in dust and rubble, but it was safe, for now. Ethan grabbed a small medkit from his belt and crouched beside her. I need to stop the bleeding, he said. Try to stay still. The Sci-Fi woman gave a weak nod. She was watching him carefully, as if still trying to understand why a human was helping her. Ethan took out a biogel patch and pressed it against the deep wound on her side. She winced but didn't cry out. Tough. He had to give her that. What's your name? He asked, trying to keep her awake. She hesitated before answering. Sayla. Sayla Vayari. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That name sounded familiar. Then it hit him. Sayla Vayari was a high-ranking Sci-Fi strategist. He had heard the name before in briefings. He had just rescued someone very important. This just got even more complicated. You're a war strategist, Ethan said. Why were you on that ship? Sayla's expression darkened. Classified. Ethan smirked. You don't really have the luxury of keeping secrets right now. She exhaled slowly, as if deciding whether to trust him. I was on a mission. A mission that no longer matters. Ethan narrowed his eyes. There was something in her voice, something uncertain. Zephyr strategists were supposed to be cold, calculating, but Sayla sounded different. Before he could press further, his comm device buzzed. Commander Voss, report back to base. The area is clear. Ethan stared at the device, his mind racing. If he went back now, they would ask why he had been delayed. And if they found Sayla, they would kill her. He glanced at her again. She was watching him, waiting to see what he would do. Ethan made his decision. He shut off the comm. We need to get out of here, he said. Sayla frowned. You're not turning me in. Ethan shook his head. Not yet. For the first time, something like hope flickered in her eyes. The war was still raging. But for now, in this small ruined building, an impossible alliance had begun, and neither of them knew just how much it would change everything. Ethan peered through a crack in the broken wall, scanning the ruined streets outside. Fires still burned in the distance, casting long shadows over the wreckage. His squad had left, but that didn't mean they were safe. If the Zephyr were looking for survivors, they would send their hunters soon. And those hunters would not leave without Sayla. He turned back to the injured Sci-Fi woman resting against the wall. Sayla Vayari, a high-ranking strategist, was watching him with cautious eyes. Her silver skin looked pale from blood loss, but she was still alert. We need to move, Ethan said. It's only a matter of time before someone comes looking for you. Sayla gave a weak nod. I agree. But why are you helping me, Commander Voss? Ethan sighed. He had asked himself the same question 100 times already. He wasn't sure if it was because she was different from the ruthless Zephyr warriors he had fought before, or if it was because he was tired of watching this war destroy everything. Let's just say I don't like leaving people to die, he said. Sayla studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then let's not waste the chance you've given me. She pushed herself up, wincing as pain shot through her side. Ethan reached out to help, but she held up a hand, stopping him. Pride. Even injured, she still had the strength of a soldier. Can you walk? Ethan asked. Selah took a shaky breath. I'll manage. Ethan nodded and moved toward the door. He knew a place where they could hide. A small underground shelter left behind by human resistance fighters. It wasn't far, but they would have to cross open ground to get there. And that meant risking detection. He glanced at Selah. Stay close and don't fall behind. She smirked slightly. I should be telling you that. Ethan shook his head. Even near death, she still had a sharp tongue. They slipped out of the building and into the ruins. The city was eerily silent now, the echoes of war fading into the distance. The only sounds were the distant crackling of fire and the occasional hiss of damaged power lines. Ethan kept his rifle raised as they moved, his eyes scanning for movement. He had a bad feeling about this. The Zephyr never left things unfinished. If Selah was as important as he suspected then, a sharp mechanical whine split the air. Ethan's instincts screamed at him, and he shoved Selah behind cover just as a blue energy blast seared through the air where she had been standing. They found us, he hissed. Selah gritted her teeth. The Zephyr hunters. Ethan cursed under his breath. The Zephyr hunters were elite warriors, sent only for high-priority targets. They wouldn't stop until Selah was either retrieved or eliminated. Another blast of plasma hit the ground near them, sending up a cloud of dust. Ethan grabbed his rifle and returned fire, hitting one of the dark, armored figures moving through the ruins. We can't stay here, he shouted. Selah nodded. There's a service tunnel ahead, northwest. It leads underground. Ethan didn't question how she knew that. If she was a strategist, she had studied battlefields long before arriving. Go. I'll cover you. Selah hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then ran, clutching her injured side. Ethan laid down suppressing fire, forcing the hunters to take cover. Then he sprinted after her. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a collapsed building. Selah reached it first, pressing a glowing panel on the side. The door hissed open, revealing a dark passage leading underground. Ethan turned to fire one last shot, only to see one of the hunters charging straight at him. The Zephyr warrior moved impossibly fast, their body covered in sleek black armor. A glowing blade of plasma extended from their wrist, slashing toward Ethan. Ethan barely dodged in time. He raised his rifle, but the hunter knocked it aside. The blade came down again. Suddenly, a pulse of violet energy shot past Ethan and slammed into the hunter's chest. The hunter froze mid-attack, their armor crackling with strange energy. Then they collapsed, unmoving. Ethan turned in shock. Selah stood behind him, her hands glowing with a strange power. He had never seen a Zephyr use psionics like that before. Selah swayed slightly, exhausted from the effort. Get inside, she said weakly. Now. Ethan didn't argue. He grabbed her arm and pulled her into the tunnel, sealing the door behind them. For a moment, there was only silence. The distant sounds of the battle faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the underground passage. Ethan turned to Selah. What the hell was that? She leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. A secret. Ethan narrowed his eyes. He had saved her life. He had risked everything to keep her alive. And now, it seemed, Selah Vayeri was hiding something even bigger than he had thought. And that secret might be the key to stopping the war. The underground tunnel was cold and silent, stretching deep beneath the ruined city. Dim emergency lights flickered along the walls, casting long shadows. Ethan kept his rifle ready, his ears alert for any sounds of pursuit. Beside him, Selah Vayeri leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. She was weak, her silver skin pale, and her wound still bleeding slightly. But that wasn't what concerned Ethan the most. It was what he had just seen. She had taken down a Zephyr hunter with nothing but a pulse of violet energy. That wasn't normal. Zephyr warriors were strong, but they didn't have powers like that. You want to explain what just happened? Ethan asked, his voice calm but firm. Selah closed her eyes for a moment, then looked at him. No. Ethan exhaled sharply. I just saved your life. Twice. And you expect me to trust you when you're hiding something. Sayla hesitated, then sighed. It's not about trust. It's about survival. If you know the truth, you will be in more danger than you already are. Ethan let out a dry chuckle. I think I passed the danger limit the moment I decided not to turn you in. Sayla studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she spoke. I am not just a strategist. I was part of a secret project, one meant to change the course of this war. Ethan frowned. What kind of project? Sayla glanced down the tunnel, as if expecting someone to be listening. What is that? Ethan muttered. Sayla's face was tense. Something is coming. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle and scanned the tunnel ahead. The path split into two, one leading further underground, the other sloping upward toward their destination. Before he could decide which way to go, a sudden gust of cold air rushed past them. Ethan spun around, his rifle aimed into the darkness. But there was nothing there. Sayla's breathing was sharp. They sent something after us. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Not just soldiers. She shook her head. No, something worse. The humming grew louder, and then a flicker of movement. From the shadows, a dark figure emerged. It was tall, its armor sleek and black, but unlike the Sci-Fi hunters from before, this one had no visible face. Instead, a glowing blue emblem pulsed on its chest. Ethan barely had time to react before it lunged forward. He fired, but the bullets passed through the figure like smoke. It's not solid, he shouted. Sayla raised her hand, and a surge of violet energy shot from her palm, striking the figure. The impact sent a ripple through its form, distorting it like a disrupted hologram. The creature staggered, but only for a moment. Then it reformed, stepping closer. Sayla gasped. It's an echo. Ethan didn't like the sound of that. Care to explain? A shadow of a warrior, Sayla said quickly, created to hunt and kill without rest. The echo raised its arm, and a long blade of energy extended from its wrist. Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed Sayla's arm and pulled her toward the right tunnel. Run. They sprinted down the passage, the echo gliding after them without making a sound. It was fast. Too fast. Ethan turned and fired again, aiming for the ceiling instead of the creature. The bullets hit a weak support beam, causing rubble to collapse behind them. The dust cloud swallowed the echo, slowing it down, but not for long. Ethan and Sayla kept running, their breath sharp in the cold underground air. Finally, they reached a metal door at the end of the passage. Ethan slammed his hand against the control panel, praying it still worked. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a beep, and the door hissed open. They rushed inside, and Ethan immediately slammed his fist against the emergency lock. The heavy metal door slid shut, sealing them inside. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a loud thud. The echo was outside. It didn't try to force the door open. Instead, the humming sound grew louder. Sayla's expression was grim. It's marking us. Ethan exhaled. Great. So now what? She looked up at him. Now, we find a way out before it returns. Ethan scanned their surroundings. The room they had entered was an old resistance bunker, filled with rusted supplies and broken monitors. In the corner, he spotted an old transport vehicle, a small hovercraft. That still work? He asked. Sayla stepped forward, placing her hand on the hovercraft's panel. After a moment, its engine hummed to life. It does now, she said. Ethan let out a small breath of relief. Then let's get moving. Sayla climbed into the pilot's seat while Ethan checked his rifle one last time. The war was still raging above them. The echo was still hunting them. And now, they had only one chance to escape before it found another way in. The small hovercraft hummed to life, its old engine sputtering but holding steady. Ethan checked the controls while Sayla adjusted the power systems. The underground bunker was shaking slightly. The echo was still outside, waiting, searching. How fast can this thing go? Ethan asked. Sayla tapped a few buttons. Fast enough, if it doesn't fall apart first. Ethan exhaled. That's comforting. A loud thud echoed through the bunker. The echo was still there, its presence a constant reminder that time was running out. Sayla focused, her violet eyes glowing faintly as she connected her energy to the hovercraft's core. The machine shuddered as the power level stabilized. It's ready, she said. Ethan didn't wait. He gripped the controls and pushed the hovercraft forward. The vehicle lurched ahead, rising slightly above the ground as it shot toward a secondary tunnel exit. The old metal doors stood closed, blocking their path. We won't make it through in time, Ethan shouted. Sayla raised her hand, and a pulse of violet energy shot forward, striking the doors. The metal buckled and twisted, clearing just enough space for them to squeeze through. The hovercraft raced through the opening, scraping against the sides as sparks flew. And then, they were outside. The ruined city stretched before them, bathed in the glow of a distant battle. Smoke and fire filled the horizon, and the sky above was thick with storm clouds. But they weren't safe yet. A loud mechanical screech erupted behind them. Ethan glanced back, and his heart sank. The echo had followed. It floated out of the tunnel, its body shifting like a shadow, glowing blue veins pulsing beneath its armor, and it was gaining on them. It's too fast, Sayla shouted. Ethan gritted his teeth and pushed the hovercraft's engines to the limit. The vehicle sped through the rubble, dodging collapsed buildings and fallen transport ships. But the echo was relentless. It didn't get tired. It didn't stop. Sayla turned to Ethan. There's only one way to stop it. Ethan glanced at her. I'm listening. Sayla's eyes were serious. I have to face it. Ethan's hands tightened around the controls. Absolutely not. Sayla shook her head. You don't understand. The echo is linked to me. It was designed to hunt me. As long as I'm here, it won't stop. Ethan clenched his jaw. He hated this, everything about this. But she was right. He slowed the hovercraft just enough for Sayla to stand. She balanced herself, then raised both hands. The air around her began to vibrate, energy crackling at her fingertips. The echo let out another shriek, sensing the power. It lunged forward. Sayla threw her hands out, releasing a wave of violet energy. The impact was instant. The echo's form flickered and distorted, its body breaking apart. But it wasn't enough. The creature reformed, still coming for her. Sayla gritted her teeth. Not enough. Ethan acted fast. He yanked the hovercraft to the side, grabbing the emergency power cell from the dashboard. Use this, he shouted, tossing it to her. Sayla caught the cell and pressed her hand against it. The energy inside merged with her own, creating a blinding glow. The echo screeched one last time, and then Sayla struck. A final explosion of violet light erupted from her, slamming into the echo with overwhelming force. The creature's body twisted and shattered, its dark form disintegrating into nothing. And then, silence. The storm clouds rumbled above. The fires still burned in the distance, but the echo was gone. Ethan slowed the hovercraft and turned to Sayla. She swayed, exhausted, barely able to keep herself upright. Ethan caught her before she could fall. Easy, he said. You did it. She looked up at him, her breathing shaky. For now. Ethan followed her gaze toward the horizon. The war wasn't over. The Zephyr were still out there. And now, both humans and Zephyr would come looking for them. They had won this battle, but the real fight was just beginning. Word count, ~750, the hovercraft floated above the ruined city, its engines humming softly. Smoke and fire still covered the horizon, and the distant sound of battle echoed through the air. Ethan kept his hand steady on the controls, his sharp eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Beside him, Sci-Fi was slumped against the seat, exhausted. Her violet eyes were dim, her breathing slow. The battle against the echo had drained her. Ethan glanced at her. "How are you holding up?" She gave a weak smile. "I'll survive." Ethan sighed in relief. He had seen how powerful she was, but even she had limits. They needed to get out of here before something else came after them. He checked the navigation system. The closest human outpost was still miles away, but there was another option, an abandoned supply station hidden in the mountains. It wasn't safe, but it was better than staying in open ground. "We need to lay low," Ethan said. "We can't go straight to my people. Not yet." Sayla nodded. "And we can't go back to mine." A long silence followed. They were both fugitives now. The Ziffer wanted Sayla back, dead or alive. And if the humans found out what she really was, they would never let her go. Ethan tightened his grip on the controls. "We'll figure something out." Suddenly, a red light flashed on the dashboard. Incoming signal detected. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Someone's tracking us." Sayla sat up, her expression alert. "Who?" Ethan adjusted the scanners, trying to read the signal. The frequency wasn't Ziffer. It wasn't human either. It was something else. Before he could react, the radio crackled. "Ethan Voss. Sci-Fi, you are not alone." Ethan's blood ran cold. The voice was deep, mechanical, and filled with authority. Sayla's hands tensed. "That's not Ziffer." Ethan's mind raced. If it wasn't Ziffer, and it wasn't human, then who was it? The radio crackled again. "You have something valuable, and there are many who would kill to take it." Ethan exchanged a glance with Sayla. They knew. Whoever was speaking knew about Sayla's abilities, knew she was different, knew she was powerful. Ethan leaned toward the radio. "Who are you?" A brief silence. Then the voice answered. "An ally, if you make the right choice." Sayla's eyes narrowed. "And if we don't?" The voice chuckled. "Then you will not live long enough to regret it." Ethan's fists tightened. He had been a soldier for years. He had fought enemies across the galaxy. But this was different. Something bigger was happening. Something beyond the war between humans and Ziffer. He looked at Sayla. She was watching him carefully, waiting for his decision. Ethan exhaled. "Where do we meet?" The voice replied instantly. "Follow the beacon, and come alone." The radio went silent. A small blinking dot appeared on the navigation screen, marking a location deep in the mountains. Ethan turned to Sayla. "This could be a trap." She nodded. "But we don't have a choice." Ethan grinned slightly. "We always have a choice. We just keep picking the dangerous ones." Sayla smirked. "Then let's not stop now." Ethan pushed the throttle forward, steering the hovercraft toward the mountains. The war had led them here. The enemies had chased them. The echo had tried to kill them. But now something else was waiting, and Ethan had a feeling that whatever was coming next was just the beginning.